In the midst of bringing life into this world, she was handed papers that would end her marriage. But what her husband didn't know was that the woman screaming in pain on that hospital bed was worth more than he could ever imagine. And her revenge? It would cost him everything he thought he'd gained. This is September 15th, 2 in the morning, Charleston Memorial Hospital, and Catherine Wells is in labor. Her contractions are coming every 3 minutes now, each one tearing through her body with the kind of pain that makes you forget your own name. The monitors are beeping steadily, tracking 2 heartbeats that will soon become separate lives. Her husband Thomas stands at the foot of the bed, but he's not holding her hand. He's not coaching her breathing. He's holding papers, legal documents, divorce papers, and he's asking her to sign them right now, between contractions, while she's about to give birth to their daughter. By the time he realized who she really was, it was already too late. The papers were signed. The trap was set. And Catherine Wells was about to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. This is the true story of betrayal, hidden wealth, and the most calculated revenge you've ever heard. A story that will unfold over the next 2 hours, revealing how one woman turned her darkest moment into her greatest weapon. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness will change how you think about power, about justice, and about what happens when someone pushes you too far. Before we reveal how this moment came to be and what happened next, there are questions that demand answers. Why would any man hand his wife divorce papers while she's in labor? What kind of calculation leads someone to choose that moment, that vulnerability, to destroy a marriage? And more importantly, what was Catherine hiding that would turn everything around? How does a woman with no apparent resources, no visible power, no obvious way to fight back, manage to destroy the man who tried to destroy her? What secret was she keeping that would change the entire trajectory of this story? These questions will be answered, but not all at once. This story unfolds like the revenge itself, carefully, strategically, with revelations that will shock you at every turn. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's go back to that delivery room and understand exactly what happened on the night that changed everything. It's hour 4 of active labor, and Catherine is barely holding on. The epidural hasn't fully taken effect yet. The pain is overwhelming, and every muscle in her body is working toward one singular purpose: bringing her daughter into the world. Thomas has stepped out of the room 7 times already, each time with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent in the hallway. The nurses notice. They exchange glances when he leaves again, their expressions shifting from professional neutrality to something closer to concern. One of them, an older woman named Patricia, who's been doing this job for 30 years, asks Catherine gently if everything is all right, if there's someone else they should call to be with her. Catherine shakes her head, can't explain that nothing is all right, that everything is falling apart, that she's known for weeks what's coming, but didn't expect it to happen like this. Hour 6 arrives, and the contractions intensify to the point where Catherine can barely breathe through them. Her entire body is shaking, sweat soaking through the hospital gown, and she's gripping the bed rails so hard the nurses worry she'll hurt herself. Thomas returns to the room, but he's not alone. There's a man with him, middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit despite the early morning hour, carrying a leather briefcase that he sets carefully on the chair in the corner. Catherine knows who this is without being told. David Morrison, been Thomas's attorney, the same lawyer who handled their prenuptial agreement 3 years ago. Thomas approaches the bed, and his face shows something that might be discomfort, might be shame, but definitely isn't love. "Catherine, we need to talk about something important." His voice is calm, measured, like he's discussing a business transaction rather than addressing his wife, who's in the process of giving birth to his child. Catherine can't respond, another contraction hitting her so hard she cries out, the sound raw and animal. The nurses move to support her, one holding her hand, another checking the monitors, both of them shooting dark looks at Thomas that he either doesn't notice or doesn't care about. When the contraction passes and Catherine can breathe again, Thomas continues as if nothing happened. "I've been thinking a lot about our marriage, about our future, and I've come to the conclusion that this isn't working. I think it's best for both of us if we end things now, cleanly, before the situation gets more complicated." Catherine stares at him, her mind struggling to process what she's hearing through the fog of pain and exhaustion. The attorney steps forward, opens his briefcase, and pulls out a stack of papers bound with a blue cover. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm David Morrison, and I'm here to facilitate what we hope will be an amicable dissolution of your marriage. These are divorce papers that my client, your husband, would like you to review and sign. We understand the timing is difficult, but Mr. Hartwell felt it was important to address this matter now rather than later." Catherine's vision blurs with tears that have nothing to do with the physical pain. Another contraction is building, and she can feel it coming like a wave that's about to crash over her. She looks at Thomas, searching his face for any sign of the man she married, the man who proposed on a beach and promised forever. What she sees instead is a stranger, someone cold and calculating, someone who planned this moment specifically because he knew she'd be vulnerable, knew she'd be unable to fight back effectively. The attorney is still talking, explaining terms and conditions and legal obligations, but Catherine can barely hear him over the roaring in her ears. Thomas cuts in, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "Catherine, the terms are straightforward. You get minimal child support, no alimony, and you need to vacate the house within 30 days of the birth. Given the prenuptial agreement you signed, these terms are actually quite generous. I'm trying to make this as painless as possible for both of us." Painless. The word hangs in the air, absurd and cruel, as Catherine screams through another contraction. One of the nurses, Patricia, steps between Thomas and the bed, her voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "Sir, your wife is in active labor. This is completely inappropriate. You need to leave and let her focus on delivering your child." Thomas doesn't even look at the nurse, his eyes fixed on Catherine. "I'm not leaving until this is settled. Catherine, I need you to sign these papers. If you don't sign them now, I'll file anyway, and you'll get even less. This way at least you have some control over the process." The attorney produces a pen, sets the papers on the rolling table beside Catherine's bed, and points to 3 places where her signature is required. Catherine looks at the papers through tear-filled eyes, the words blurring together. Legal terminology she doesn't understand, mixed with numbers that mean she'll have almost nothing. She thinks about refusing, about telling Thomas to wait until after the birth, until she can think clearly, until she can get her own lawyer. But she knows how the prenup is written, knows Thomas made sure she'd have no leverage, no power, no way to fight back effectively. And underneath the pain and betrayal and shock, something else is stirring in Catherine. Something cold and calculated, something that understands this moment might actually be an opportunity. If Thomas wants to play this game, and if he wants to underestimate her, if he wants to believe she's helpless and broken, then maybe she should let him believe exactly that. Catherine reaches for the pen with a shaking hand. One of the nurses tries to stop her, tells her she doesn't have to do this now, that she can wait. But Catherine shakes her head. Another contraction is coming, and she scrawls her signature in 3 places before the pain takes over completely. Thomas takes the papers, checks the signatures, nods to his attorney with satisfaction. "Thank you for being reasonable about this. I'll have someone pick up my things from the house this week. We can discuss custody arrangements after you've recovered from the birth." Then he leaves, just walks out of the delivery room with his lawyer, while Catherine is still in labor, still hours away from delivering their child. Meet and the nurses stand frozen in shock at what they just witnessed. Patricia moves to Catherine's side, takes her hand, and says something about reporting this, about calling someone. But Catherine isn't listening anymore. She's retreating somewhere deep inside herself, where the pain can't reach, where Thomas's betrayal can't touch her, where she's already planning what comes next. Hour 10 of labor, and Catherine is alone, except for the medical staff. Patricia stays with her, holding her hand through contractions, whispering encouragement, rage on her behalf clear in every gesture. The other nurses rotate through, each one treating Catherine with extra kindness, extra care, as if compassion can somehow make up for the cruelty they witnessed. Catherine barely speaks, conserving her energy for the work her body needs to do. But her mind is racing, planning, calculating, thinking through every move like a chess game where she's just sacrificed her queen to set up a checkmate. Hour 12, and the contractions are constant now, no break between them, her body pushing toward the final stage. The doctor arrives, checks her progress, and says it's almost time. Catherine nods, can't speak anymore. Every ounce of her being focused on this one task. Hour 14, and Catherine pushes with everything she has, every muscle straining, the pain beyond anything she imagined, beyond what she thought was possible to endure. And then, at 6:43 in the evening on September 15th, Emma Rose Hartwell enters the world. 7 pounds 4 ounces, perfect in every way, with dark hair and lungs that announce her arrival to the entire maternity ward. The nurses place Emma on Catherine's chest, and for one perfect moment, everything else disappears. The divorce papers don't matter. Thomas's betrayal doesn't matter. The pain and fear and uncertainty don't matter. There is only this baby, this perfect tiny human, and a love so fierce it physically hurts. Catherine looks into her daughter's eyes and makes a silent promise. No one will ever hurt you the way your father just hurt me. No one will ever make you feel powerless. I will protect you. I will fight for you. And I will show you what real strength looks like. The nurses give Catherine time with Emma, those first precious moments of bonding, skin-to-skin contact while Emma figures out how to nurse. Patricia helps adjust pillows, shows Catherine how to support Emma's head, treats her with the gentleness of someone who understands this woman has been through more than just physical labor tonight. Then Catherine asks the question that makes Patricia pause. Is there another woman on this floor who gave birth today? Around the same time as me? The nurse's expression changes, becomes guarded, and Catherine knows immediately that her suspicion is correct. There is another woman, another baby, another piece of Thomas's deception she hadn't fully understood until this moment. Patricia hesitates, bound by privacy rules, but something in Catherine's face must convince her, because she speaks quietly. Room 412, 3 floors up. Baby boy, born about 3 hours ago, The mother's name is Vivian. Catherine closes her eyes, holds Emma closer, feels the final piece of her old life crumble away. And Thomas hadn't just been having an affair. He'd gotten another woman pregnant. While Catherine was carrying his child, he was also expecting a child with someone else. The timelines aligned perfectly, horrifically, meaning both women had been pregnant simultaneously, both believing they were building a future with the same man. Catherine asks one more question, her voice barely a whisper. Does she know about me? Patricia shakes her head slowly. From what I've heard from the other nurses, she had no idea. She thought he was divorced, that his ex-wife was out of the picture. She found out the truth today, when she saw his name on your room assignment sheet. She's in shock, devastated, and apparently asks him to leave and not come back. So Thomas managed to deceive two women completely, to build two separate lives, and to create two children in the same time frame. And his plan had been to keep the child he wanted and discard the mothers he didn't. Catherine lies in that hospital bed, holding her newborn daughter, and feels something shift inside her. The grief and pain are still there, will probably always be there in some form, but they're joined now by something else. A cold clarity, a sense of purpose, an understanding that she's been underestimated in a way that will prove to be Thomas's biggest mistake. Because what Thomas doesn't know, what he couldn't possibly know because Catherine made sure he never found out, is that she's not helpless. She's not poor. She's not the vulnerable woman he thinks he just destroyed. 6 months ago, Catherine received a registered letter that changed everything. An inheritance from her estranged grandmother, a woman she hadn't spoken to in 15 years after a family falling out. Eleanor Pemberton had passed away and left her entire estate to her only granddaughter. $47 million in cash, stocks, property, and investments. Catherine had been in shock when the lawyers explained it to her, and had needed weeks to process what it meant. And by the time she'd fully absorbed this new reality, she'd already started noticing the signs of Thomas's affair. Her instinct had been to keep the inheritance secret, to open accounts in her maiden name, to meet with financial advisors while Thomas thought she was shopping or at prenatal appointments. She'd set up trusts and protection structures, created a financial foundation that Thomas knew nothing about. She'd done all of this while pregnant, while watching her marriage crumble, so while preparing for the moment she suspected was coming. She just hadn't expected it to come quite like this, quite so cruelly, in the delivery room with divorce papers and ultimatums. But now that it has, now that Thomas has shown exactly who he is, Catherine knows what she needs to do. She asks Patricia to help her make a phone call, can barely hold the phone herself, her body exhausted and shaking. She calls Jessica, her best friend who's been worried about her for months, who's been urging her to leave Thomas, who suspected something was terribly wrong. Jessica answers on the first ring, has been waiting for news about the birth, and what Catherine tells her makes Jessica go completely silent for a full 10 seconds. What did he do? Jessica's voice, when she finally speaks, is ice cold, fury barely contained. He served you divorce papers while you were in labor? The nurses witnessed this? Catherine confirms it all, her voice flat with exhaustion. Then she says the words that will set everything in motion. I need you to do something for me. I need you to call Margaret Chen. Jessica knows who Margaret Chen is. Everyone in Charleston knows. She's the divorce attorney who handles high net worth cases, the one who's never lost a custody battle, the one who's known for absolutely destroying unfaithful spouses in court. Her retainer alone is rumored to be $50,000. Catherine, her retainer is outrageous, How would you even afford? Jessica stops mid-sentence, realization dawning. The inheritance. You're going to use your grandmother's money. Catherine's response is simple. I can afford her. I can afford anything I need to bury him. Call her tonight. Tell her I need to see her as soon as possible. Tell her I have evidence of adultery, financial fraud, abandonment, everything she needs to build a case. And Jessica? Tell her I want full custody and I want him to pay for what he did. Jessica is quiet for a moment, then her voice comes back steady and certain. I'll call her right now. And Catherine, I'm proud of you. I'm coming to the hospital first thing in the morning, and I'm not leaving your side until this is over. You're not alone in this. We're going to make him regret every choice he's ever made. Catherine hangs up the phone, looks down at Emma sleeping peacefully against her chest, and allows herself a small smile. Thomas Hartwell thinks he won tonight. He thinks he walked away with everything he wanted, his child, his freedom, his money, his mistress. See, what he doesn't realize is that he just handed Catherine the weapon she needed to destroy him. He showed his cruelty in front of witnesses, medical professionals who were horrified by his behavior. He signed legal documents that prove abandonment. He created a paper trail of his betrayal and his calculated cruelty. And most importantly, he underestimated her, assumed she had no resources, no power, no ability to fight back. That assumption will cost him everything. Catherine spends 3 days in the hospital, 3 days that feel both endless and too short, caring for Emma while her body recovers from childbirth and her mind plans for war. Thomas doesn't visit once, doesn't call, sends only a single text message on the second day asking when she'll be moving out of the house. Catherine doesn't respond. Let him think she's compliant, undefeated, too overwhelmed by new motherhood to fight. The nurses continue to treat her with extraordinary kindness, especially Patricia, who stops by even when she's not assigned to Catherine's room, bringing extra blankets and better food and quiet conversation. On the second day, Patricia does something that will prove invaluable later. She makes copies of Catherine's medical records from the delivery, including the notes where multiple nurses documented Thomas's presence with his attorney, the divorce papers, and their professional observations about the inappropriate nature of the situation. She also provides written statements from herself and 2 other nurses who witnessed what happened, their accounts detailed and damning. Patricia hands these documents to Catherine in a manila envelope and says simply, "You're going to need these. What he did was cruel, and those of us who saw it will never forget it. If you need us to testify, you call. We will be there." Jessica arrives on the morning of day 2 with an overnight bag, announces she's staying until Catherine is ready to leave, and refuses to hear any arguments about it. She holds Emma while Catherine showers for the first time since giving birth, helps with diaper changes and feeding schedules, runs interference when hospital staff ask questions about where Catherine will be going after discharge. Jessica has already spoken with Margaret Chen, who agreed to take the case immediately after hearing the details. The attorney has cleared her schedule for a meeting the moment Catherine is ready, but Jessica insists Catherine focus on physical recovery first, saying revenge is a dish best served cold and a few extra days won't matter. On day 3, Catherine gets an unexpected visitor. A woman around her age, light brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized shirt, her eyes red from crying. She stands in the doorway of Catherine's room looking uncertain and devastated, and Catherine knows without asking who this is. Vivian, the other woman, the one who gave birth to Thomas's son 3 floors up 3 hours after Catherine delivered Emma. The 2 women stare at each other for a long moment, Years of their lives intersecting in the worst possible way. Finally, Vivian speaks, her voice hoarse like she's been crying for days. I didn't know. About you. About any of it. He told me he was divorced, that it had been finalized months before we met, but that his ex-wife wanted nothing to do with him. I never would have. I'm not the kind of person who, I thought I was building a real relationship with him. Catherine could hate this woman, should hate her maybe, but looking at Vivian's devastated face, she sees only another victim of Thomas's manipulation. She gestures to the chair beside her bed, and Vivian sits, moving carefully like someone still recovering from childbirth. And the two women begin to piece together the full scope of Thomas's deception. Vivian had met Thomas 10 months ago at a bar near his office and had been charmed by his attention, his confidence, and his apparent success. He'd told her he was recently divorced, that his ex-wife had been unsupportive of his career, and they'd grown apart. He showed her pictures of a house he claimed he lived in alone. I took her to dinners and events, introduced her to friends who all seemed to know his story about being newly single. When Vivian got pregnant 4 months into their relationship, Thomas had seemed thrilled and talked about how he'd always wanted children, how this was a fresh start for him. He'd been attentive throughout the pregnancy, attending most appointments, helping her prepare a nursery in her apartment, making plans for their future together. Vivian had believed every word until yesterday, when a nurse mentioned something about Thomas's other baby being born the same day. The confusion on Vivian's face had made the nurse realize she'd revealed something Vivian didn't know, and the whole truth had come spilling out in that horrible way where you suddenly understand your entire life has been a lie. And Vivian had confronted Thomas when he came to visit her and the baby, demanded the truth, and he'd tried to explain it away, said his situation with Catherine was complicated. They were technically still married, but separated. He'd planned to tell Vivian, but the timing was never right. Vivian had ordered him out of her hospital room and called her lawyer immediately. Now she sits in Catherine's room, looking shell-shocked and furious. Two women who should be rivals finding common ground in their shared experience of Thomas's betrayal. Catherine tells Vivian about the divorce papers in the delivery room, about the prenuptial agreement that was supposed to leave her with nothing, about Thomas's calculated cruelty. Vivian listens with growing horror. I then shares her own discovery that Thomas had been draining money from a joint credit card they'd opened together, charges she didn't recognize for hotels and dinners she never attended. He'd been using their joint finances to fund dates with Catherine, using money from his marriage to Catherine to impress Vivian, playing both women against each other without either knowing the other existed. The two women talk for over an hour, comparing timelines and stories, filling in gaps in each other's understanding. By the end of the conversation, something unexpected has formed between them. Not quite friendship. The situation is too raw and complicated for that, but a kind of alliance. Two women who both got played by the same man, both now facing single motherhood because of his deception, both determined to make sure he faces consequences. Vivian asks Catherine what she's planning to do, and Catherine tells her about Margaret Chen, about the evidence she's gathering, about her intention to fight for full custody and make Thomas pay in every way possible. Vivian nods slowly, says she's also getting a lawyer, also planning to file for child support, also collecting evidence of Thomas's lies and financial manipulation. Then Vivian says something that Catherine hadn't considered. I have text messages, hundreds of them, where Thomas talks about his ex-wife, meaning you, and says things that directly contradict what he was telling you, where he discusses his financial situation and it's clear he was lying about money to both of us, where he makes plans that show premeditation, Show he knew exactly what he was doing. Would that help your case? Catherine's smile is the first genuine one she's managed since before the delivery room. That would help immensely. Before Vivian leaves, she does one more thing. She shows Catherine a photo of her son, asleep in the hospital basement, perfect and innocent, and unaware of the chaos surrounding his birth. His name is Mason, Vivian says quietly, and he deserves better than what his father gave him. They both do, our children. They deserve to know their fathers don't get to treat people this way without consequences. Catherine looks at the photo, then down at Emma asleep in her arms, and feels her resolve harden into something unbreakable. You're right, and we're going to make sure they learn that lesson. After Vivian leaves, Catherine asks Jessica to add one more task to her list. Find out everything you can about Thomas's finances. Every account, every investment, every asset he has. Margaret will need all of it for the divorce case, but I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we walk into her office. Jessica, who works in financial analysis, grins. Already on it. I called in some favors and I've been pulling public records since yesterday. Catherine, he's hiding money, offshore accounts, shell corporations, the whole playbook people use when they're planning to screw over their spouse in a divorce. He's been setting this up for months, moving assets where you supposedly couldn't touch them. Supposedly being the key word, because a good forensic accountant can find anything. Catherine's response is calm. Then we get the best forensic accountant money can buy. Whatever it costs, I don't care. See, I want every dollar he tried to hide found and documented. I want his financial crimes exposed. If he's evading taxes or committing fraud, I want that discovered too. Jessica's expression turns serious. Catherine, if we expose financial crimes, he could face criminal charges, federal prison time. Are you prepared for Emma to grow up with her father in prison? Catherine looks at her daughter, thinks about the man who handed her divorce papers while she screamed in pain, who abandoned her the moment their child was born, who created two families simultaneously without caring about the damage he caused. She thinks about Emma growing up watching Thomas get away with everything, learning that cruel people don't face consequences, that money and manipulation are rewarded. Her answer comes without hesitation, as Emma deserves to grow up knowing her mother fought for her, knowing that truth matters, knowing that people who hurt others don't get to just walk away. If Thomas goes to prison, that's a consequence of his own choices, not mine. Catherine is discharged from the hospital on day 4, and Jessica drives her not to the estate Catherine shared with Thomas, but to Jessica's apartment in downtown Charleston. Catherine will never set foot in that house again if she can help it. Never sleep in the bed where Thomas lied to her for years. Never walk through rooms that were supposed to represent their future together. Jessica has already packed up Emma's nursery, the items Catherine purchased, and assembled herself while Thomas was supposedly working late, and set everything up in her spare bedroom. See, it's small and cramped compared to the estate, but it feels safer, warmer, like a place where Catherine can breathe without wondering what fresh betrayal awaits around the corner. That evening, while Emma sleeps in her bassinet and Catherine tries to process everything that's happened, Thomas sends a text message. It's time for you to arrange movers to get your things out of the house. I need the space cleared by the end of the month per the divorce agreement. Also, we should discuss my visitation schedule with Emma. I'm thinking every other weekend starting when she's 2 months old. Catherine reads the message and feels a cold rage settle over her. The audacity of him dictating terms, assuming she'll just comply, treating their daughter like an inconvenient scheduling issue. She doesn't respond. He lets him sit in his confidence a while longer, while she prepares to shatter his world. The meeting with Margaret Chen happened 6 days after Emma's birth, in the attorney's office on King Street, all glass and steel, and expensive art on the walls. Margaret is in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence in her eyes that makes you understand why she's never lost a case. She listens to Catherine's story without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad, her expression growing harder with each detail. When Catherine finishes, Margaret sits back in her leather chair and speaks with the calm authority of someone who knows exactly how this will play out. Mrs. Hartwell, what your husband did is not just cruel. It's legally actionable in multiple ways. Serving divorce papers during active labor constitutes extreme emotional distress. Abandoning you immediately after childbirth demonstrates unfitness as a parent. The affair and the second child born the same day show a pattern of deception and poor judgment. The prenuptial agreement he forced you to sign under duress while you were in labor may be voidable. And if he's been hiding assets as you suspect, that's fraud. We're going to destroy him in court. But first, we need to gather every piece of evidence we can find. Catherine opens her bag and pulls out the manila envelope Patricia gave her. Medical records, nurse statements, photographs of the divorce papers with time stamps showing when they were served. She pulls out her phone and shows Margaret screenshots of Thomas's text messages that she'd photographed from his iPad weeks ago, on evidence of the affair, evidence of his planning to leave her. Then she hands over financial documents, credit card statements showing suspicious charges, bank records showing money being moved around. Margaret's smile is predatory. This is excellent. But we need more. We need a forensic accountant to trace every dollar your husband has moved or hidden. We need investigators to document his current living situation, who he's with, how he's spending his time. We need to build a custody case that shows you're the stable parent and he's unreliable. And we need to do all of this before he realizes you're not the helpless woman he thinks you are. Catherine leans forward, her voice steady despite the exhaustion of new motherhood and recent childbirth. Ms. Chen, there's something else you need to know. Something Thomas doesn't know, and that changes everything about my situation. I have resources he isn't aware of. Substantial resources. Money is not an issue for this case. Whatever experts we need, whatever investigators, whatever it costs to win, I can afford it. Margaret's eyebrows rise slightly. How substantial are we talking? Catherine tells her about the inheritance, about the $47 million Thomas knows nothing about the accounts in her maiden name, and the trusts already established. Margaret's expression shifts from professional interest to something approaching delight. Mrs. Hartwell, your husband made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed you were powerless because he'd structured your marriage to make you financially dependent. He timed his betrayal for maximum vulnerability. And he thought he held all the cards. Instead, he's handed us everything we need to bury him while you have the resources to wage this battle for as long as it takes. This is going to be very satisfying. Over the next hour, Margaret outlines the strategy. First, they'll file an emergency motion to modify the custody arrangement Thomas proposed, requesting full legal and physical custody for Catherine, with only supervised visitation for Thomas based on his abandonment and emotional abuse. Second, they'll challenge the divorce papers Catherine signed under duress, arguing they're not valid given the circumstances under which they were obtained. Third, they'll hire forensic accountants to find every hidden asset and file motions to freeze Thomas's accounts so he can't move more money before the case concludes. Fourth, they'll investigate Thomas's relationship with Vivian, documenting his deception of both women to establish a pattern of dishonesty that reflects on his character and fitness as a parent. Fifth, they'll gather evidence of any financial crimes, tax evasion, fraud, anything that could result in criminal charges separate from the civil case. Margaret assigns tasks to her team immediately, making calls while Catherine is still in her office, setting investigations in motion. By the time Catherine leaves 2 hours later, a small army of legal professionals and private investigators is working on her case. The cost would be astronomical for most people, hundreds of thousands of dollars before they even get to trial. For Catherine, with her grandmother's fortune, it's a rounding error. The price of justice, of protection for her daughter, and of making sure Thomas Hartwell learns that his actions have consequences. That night, Catherine lies in Jessica's spare bedroom with Emma sleeping beside her in the bassinet, and finally allows herself to cry. Not the hopeless tears of the delivery room, but something else. Tears of rage and grief and determination. She's exhausted, her body still healing, her emotions raw and overwhelming, but underneath it all is steel. A core of strength she didn't know she had, forged in the fire of Thomas's betrayal, hardened by his cruelty, sharpened into a weapon by his underestimation of who she is and what she's capable of. Over the next 3 weeks, while Thomas thinks Catherine is cowering somewhere licking her wounds, Margaret's team works around the clock building their case. The forensic accountants discover 8 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama, holding approximately $12 million that Thomas failed to disclose in the divorce papers. They find shell corporations he used to hide assets, real estate holdings in other people's names, a complex web of financial deception that took years to construct. The investigators document Thomas's current living situation, discovering he's moved Vivian and their son Mason into the family estate, the same house he demanded Catherine vacate. They photograph him coming and going at odd hours, documenting that Vivian is doing most of the childcare, while Thomas maintains his usual work schedule. They discover he's been telling people at work that Catherine abandoned him and Emma, that she's mentally unstable, that he's raising his daughter alone, lies that are easily disproven by hospital records and witness statements. Margaret's team reaches out to Vivian's attorney, and the 2 lawyers coordinate their cases, realizing they can support each other's claims against Thomas. Vivian agrees to provide her text messages and to testify if needed about Thomas's deception and manipulation. She's furious enough at being lied to that she wants him to face consequences just as much as Catherine does. The investigators also discover something Catherine hadn't known about. A woman Thomas dated 5 years ago, before he met Catherine, who has a similar story. Thomas had gotten her pregnant, promised marriage and a future together, then disappeared the moment she told him about the baby. She'd raised her son alone, receiving minimal child support that Thomas fought at every turn. She'd tried to warn Catherine when she heard about the engagement, but Thomas had intercepted the message and told Catherine the woman was a crazy ex trying to cause problems. This woman, Rachel Monroe, is willing to testify about Thomas's pattern of using women and discarding them, about his lack of interest in being an actual father despite claiming children are important to him. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, Margaret files their paperwork with the family court. Emergency motion for full custody, based on abandonment and emotional abuse. Motion to void the divorce agreement signed under duress. Motion to freeze Thomas's accounts pending full financial disclosure. Subpoenas for all his financial records, bank statements, tax returns, everything. A demand for depositions from Thomas, his attorney, David Morrison, who witnessed the delivery room incident, and several of Thomas's colleagues. The papers are served to Thomas at his office on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a process server who hands him a stack of documents 3 inches thick. Catherine isn't there to see his face when he reads them, but she hears about it later from Margaret, who hears from her investigator. Thomas apparently went pale, started shaking, called his attorney immediately in a panic. Because the documents don't just lay out the legal claims, they list Catherine's financial resources, make clear she has the money to fight this battle for years if necessary. They reference offshore accounts, hidden assets, and financial crimes. They include affidavits from the nurses who witnessed the delivery room scene, from Vivian about Thomas's lies, and from Rachel about his pattern of behavior. They paint a picture of a man who is manipulative, dishonest, cruel, and unfit to have custody of a child. Thomas tries to call Catherine that evening 12 times in an hour, each call going to voicemail. He sends texts that start demanding and become increasingly desperate. "We need to talk about this. You're being unreasonable. You can't afford this kind of legal battle. Where did you get money for Margaret Chen? Call me back right now. This is about our daughter. We need to work this out." Catherine doesn't respond to any of it, following Margaret's advice to have no direct contact with Thomas outside of court-supervised channels. Every message he sends is forwarded to Margaret, becomes part of the evidence file showing his attempts to control and intimidate. 2 days later, Thomas's attorney files a response that tries to downplay everything, claims the delivery room incident was a misunderstanding, that Thomas was just trying to handle practical matters at an inopportune time, claims Catherine is being vindictive and using sudden mysterious wealth to wage a war against a father who just wants to be in his daughter's life, claims the offshore accounts are legitimate business holdings and completely legal. The response is weak, and Margaret knows it. She files a counter-response that methodically destroys every argument Thomas's lawyer made, citing case law and precedent, attaching more evidence and witness statements. The judge assigned to the case, Patricia Montgomery, sets a hearing date for 2 weeks out to address the emergency custody motion. In the meantime, Thomas is granted temporary supervised visitation with Emma, 2 hours per week at a family visitation center where a social worker monitors his interaction with his daughter. The first supervised visit is a disaster. Thomas arrives 15 minutes late, immediately complains about being watched, and spends most of the 2 hours on his phone while Emma cries in her car seat. The social worker's report notes that Mr. Hartwell appeared uncomfortable holding the infant, did not attempt to feed or change her, despite the child clearly needing both, and showed more interest in his phone than in interacting with his daughter. When Emma began crying more persistently, Mr. Hartwell asked how much longer the visit needed to last, stating he had somewhere else to be. This report becomes Exhibit G in Catherine's custody filing. Margaret also files a complaint with the IRS regarding Thomas's offshore accounts and suspicious financial activity, including evidence that he's been underreporting income for years. The IRS doesn't move quickly on most things, but tax fraud involving millions of dollars tends to get attention. Within a week, Thomas receives notification that he's being audited, that agents will be reviewing his financial records for the past 7 years, that he needs to preserve all documents and prepare for interviews. His financial crimes, committed to protect his wealth from Catherine in a divorce, are now threatening to land him in federal prison. The custody hearing arrives on a cold November morning, 6 weeks after Emma's birth. Catherine walks into the Charleston County Family Court building, carrying Emma in a sling, flanked by Margaret and Jessica. She's dressed in a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, looking exactly like what she is, a new mother doing her best in impossible circumstances. Thomas arrives with his lawyer, and a woman Catherine has never seen before, presumably hired to make him look more sympathetic. more family-oriented. He's wearing an expensive suit and his usual confident expression. But Catherine notices the tightness around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He's worried, and he should be. Judge Montgomery calls the court to order and addresses both parties. We're here today to consider Mrs. Hartwell's emergency motion for full custody of the minor child, Emma Rose Hartwell, and to review the temporary custody arrangement currently in place. Mrs. Hartwell, your attorney may proceed. Margaret stands, and for the next hour she methodically presents the case against Thomas. She starts with the delivery room incident, calling Patricia the nurse to testify. Patricia describes in detail what she witnessed: the divorce papers, the attorney, Thomas's coldness, Catherine's distress, his departure before the birth. Her testimony is calm and factual and devastating. She's followed by the other two nurses who were present, each corroborating the story, each expressing professional concern about Thomas's behavior. Then Margaret presents the hospital records, the medical notes documenting the incident, the timeline showing Thomas left and didn't return. She presents the divorce papers themselves, with timestamps and the terms that would have left Catherine destitute, arguing they were obtained under unconscionable circumstances and should be void. But Thomas's attorney tries to object, tries to argue that marital issues are separate from custody matters, but Judge Montgomery overrules him. The circumstances under which these papers were presented directly relate to Mr. Hartwell's character and judgment, which are absolutely relevant to custody decisions. Proceed, Ms. Chen. Margaret then shifts to Thomas's pattern of behavior, calling Vivian to the stand. Vivian, holding baby Mason, testifies about Thomas's lies, about his claims to be divorced, about his deception spanning nearly a year. She describes finding out about Catherine while in the hospital, about confronting Thomas, about his attempts to explain away his double life. She confirms that Thomas is currently living with her and Mason in his family home. But that, when the relationship is over and she's only there temporarily while looking for her own place. When asked about Thomas's parenting, Vivian's answer is cutting. He barely interacts with Mason. He's present, but not engaged. It's like having a roommate who occasionally looks at the baby, but doesn't actually participate in caring for him. I do everything: the feeding, the changing, the middle of the night wake-ups. He says he's too busy with work and with handling legal issues. Margaret then presents evidence from Thomas's first supervised visit, the social worker's report showing his disinterest and incompetence. She presents testimony from the social worker who supervised the visit, who states professionally but clearly that Mr. Hartwell does not appear to have bonded with his daughter and shows minimal interest in developing parenting skills. Then Margaret drops the financial evidence, presenting documents showing the offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the years of tax evasion. She doesn't present this as part of the custody argument directly, but as evidence of Thomas's character, his willingness to break laws and lie systematically, and his lack of integrity. She mentions casually that this evidence has been referred to the IRS and that a criminal investigation is underway. Finally, Margaret calls Rachel Monroe, Thomas's ex from 5 years ago, who testifies about her similar experience with Thomas, establishing a pattern that spans a decade. He got me pregnant, promised we'd get married and build a life together, then vanished the moment I told him about the baby. I've been raising my son Michael alone while Thomas pays minimum child support and never visits, but never calls, never acknowledges his son's existence. When I tried to warn Catherine before her wedding, Thomas threatened me with legal action if I contacted her again. This man sees children as possessions or inconveniences, not as people to love and raise. By the time Margaret finishes presenting her case, the courtroom is silent. Judge Montgomery has been taking notes throughout, her expression growing increasingly stern. Thomas's attorney stands to present his defense, but what can he say? He calls Thomas to the stand, and Thomas tries to explain, but his explanations sound hollow even to himself. He claims he was just trying to handle difficult matters practically. He claims he loves his daughter and wants to be in her life. He claims the financial issues are misunderstandings that will be cleared up. But when Margaret cross-examines him, she tears apart every claim systematically. You love your daughter? Then why did you abandon your wife before she was even born? Why did you skip the first supervised visit and show up late to the second? Why do you spend your visitation time on your phone instead of interacting with Emma? Thomas stammers that he's been under stress, that he's dealing with a lot, that he's doing his best. Margaret pounces. You were under stress? Your wife was in labor, Mr. Hartwell. She was screaming in pain bringing your child into the world. But you chose that moment to serve her divorce papers and walk away. Tell me, what kind of stress justifies that behavior? Thomas has no answer. Margaret continues, You claim the offshore accounts are legitimate business holdings. And then why didn't you disclose them in the divorce papers you served to Mrs. Hartwell? Why did you structure them through shell corporations? Why have you been underreporting income to the IRS for years? Thomas's attorney objects, arguing that financial matters aren't relevant to custody. Judge Montgomery overrules again. Mr. Morrison, your client's pattern of deception and illegal activity absolutely speaks to his character and fitness as a parent. The objection is overruled. Mr. Hartwell, answer the question. Thomas tries to claim it was his accountant's advice, that he didn't fully understand the structures, that he was just trying to protect his assets for his future children. Margaret shows the timeline of when these accounts were created, all of them established after Thomas married Catherine, all of them structured specifically to hide money from her in the event of divorce. This wasn't protection, Your Honor. This was a premeditated theft. Mr. Hartwell spent years building a financial structure designed to leave his wife with nothing if he decided to discard her. And when that time came, he chose the cruelest possible moment to execute his plan. A moment when she was physically incapacitated, emotionally vulnerable, and unable to think clearly or defend herself. This is not the behavior of a man who should have custody of a child. The hearing lasts 4 hours total, and by the end, Thomas looks deflated, defeated, nothing like the confident man who walked in that morning. Judge Montgomery asks if there are any final statements. Margaret stands. Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell is not asking the court to sever Mr. Hartwell's parental rights entirely, despite the fact that his behavior might justify such a request. She's simply asking for primary custody with supervised visitation, allowing Mr. Hartwell the opportunity to develop a relationship with his daughter while ensuring Emma's safety and well-being. Mrs. Hartwell is a devoted mother who has demonstrated stability, integrity, and genuine care for her child. Mr. Hartwell has demonstrated the opposite. The choice here is clear. Judge Montgomery nods, makes a few more notes, then looks up at both parties. I've heard enough. I'm prepared to issue a ruling today, rather than taking this under advisement. Mr. Hartwell, your behavior as described by multiple credible witnesses is among the most callous I've encountered in 23 years on this bench. And you abandoned your wife during childbirth to serve her divorce papers. You deceived 2 women simultaneously, resulting in 2 children born hours apart. You've shown minimal interest in actually parenting your daughter. You've committed financial fraud that is now the subject of federal investigation. And, when given the opportunity to explain yourself today, you've offered nothing but excuses and deflection. Mrs. Hartwell is granted full legal and physical custody of Emma Rose Hartwell. Mr. Hartwell is granted supervised visitation only, 4 hours per month at a court-approved facility, contingent on his completion of parenting classes and his compliance with all court orders. Mr. Hartwell is ordered to pay child support calculated based on his actual income, including the previously hidden offshore funds, and the amount to be determined after full financial disclosure. Mr. Hartwell is also ordered to pay Mrs. Hartwell's legal fees in this matter. The divorce papers, signed by Mrs. Hartwell under duress, are hereby declared void and unenforceable. If Mr. Hartwell wishes to pursue divorce, he may file new papers through proper channels, and Mrs. Hartwell will have adequate time and resources to respond. Finally, I am referring the financial evidence presented today to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. This court is adjourned. The gavel comes down, and Catherine feels something release in her chest, something that's been tight and painful since the delivery room. She looks at Emma, asleep against her chest through all the proceedings, and whispers thank you to the daughter who gave her a reason to fight. Sid Thomas sits frozen at his table, his lawyer whispering urgently to him, probably explaining how badly he just lost. Margaret leans over to Catherine with a rare, genuine smile. That was one of the most satisfying rulings of my career. You did it, Catherine. You protected your daughter, and you made him face consequences for his actions. That's all anyone can ask for. Catherine nods, can't quite speak yet, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion and the weight of what just happened. Jessica hugs her carefully, mindful of Emma between them, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you. You're the strongest person I know. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters has gathered, having heard about the case through court filings. They shout questions at Catherine about the delivery room incident, about the hidden money, how about her plans now. Catherine ignores them, letting Margaret handle the brief statement they prepared. Today, justice was served for Catherine Hartwell and her daughter Emma. Judge Montgomery's ruling recognizes the truth of what happened and prioritizes the well-being of a child over the convenience of a father who has shown he's not ready or willing to be the parent Emma deserves. We have no further comment at this time. Then Catherine climbs into Jessica's car, and they drive away, leaving Thomas and his lawyers to face the reporters alone. That evening, Catherine sits in Jessica's apartment feeding Emma and processing everything that happened. The custody battle is won, but the larger war continues. The divorce still needs to be finalized properly, the financial settlements determined, the criminal investigation completed. And Margaret estimates it will take another year to fully resolve everything, and even then, Thomas will likely appeal various decisions, draw out proceedings as long as possible. But Catherine has time. She has resources. She has the truth on her side and the law backing her up. Most importantly, she has Emma, safe and protected and hers. The news of the custody ruling spreads quickly through Charleston's social circles. That small, wealthy community where everyone knows everyone and gossip travels fast. Thomas's reputation, already damaged by the delivery room story, becomes completely toxic. Friends and colleagues distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone under federal investigation, someone who abandoned his wife during childbirth. His parents, who had mostly stayed out of the situation claiming it was between Thomas and Catherine, finally took a side. They reach out to Catherine through her lawyer, apologizing for their son's behavior, asking if they can have a relationship with their granddaughter. Catherine, after some consideration, agrees to supervised visits, recognizing that Emma might benefit from knowing her paternal grandparents even if her father is largely absent. Thomas's mother comes to one of these visits and weeps while holding Emma, telling Catherine she had no idea her son was capable of such cruelty. that she's ashamed and heartbroken. She offers to help Catherine in any way she can, financially or otherwise. Catherine thanks her, but declines the money, explains she has her own resources, but appreciates the sentiment. And the relationship between Catherine and Thomas's parents becomes cordial if not warm, a connection maintained for Emma's sake rather than out of any real closeness. Thomas himself spirals in the months following the custody hearing. His job, already precarious after the news of his personal life spread through the office, becomes untenable when the IRS investigation escalates. He's placed on leave while the company's legal team determines whether they could be liable for any of Thomas's financial activities, since some of his offshore structures involved client funds. Eventually, he's terminated, the firm releasing a statement that they take ethical violations seriously, and Mr. Hartwell's employment has been severed. Without his job, facing mounting legal bills for both the family court case and the criminal investigation, and dealing with frozen assets and IRS penalties, Thomas's financial situation deteriorates rapidly. He's forced to sell the family estate, the house that's been in his family for generations, to pay legal fees and back taxes. Vivian moves out with Mason, wants nothing more to do with Thomas, files her own lawsuit for fraudulent misrepresentation in their relationship. She and Catherine maintain a cordial relationship, united by their shared experience and their desire to protect their children from their father's toxicity. The two women occasionally meet for coffee, comparing notes on their respective legal cases, supporting each other in a strange friendship born from terrible circumstances. Thomas tries several times to reach out to Catherine directly, emails that range from apologetic to threatening to desperate. I never meant for things to go this way. I made mistakes, but I still care about Emma. You're destroying my life over vindictiveness. Please, we need to talk. I'll do whatever you want. Just call off your lawyers. Catherine doesn't respond to any of them, forwards everything to Margaret, who adds it to their evidence file. Each message shows Thomas's continued attempts to manipulate and control, his inability to take real responsibility for his actions, his focus on himself rather than on the daughter he claims to care about. 6 months after the custody hearing, the IRS completes its investigation and refers the case to the Department of Justice for prosecution. Thomas is indicted on 12 counts of tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering, crimes carrying a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. His attorney negotiates a plea deal, Thomas agreeing to plead guilty to 6 counts in exchange for a recommended sentence of 8 years. He also agrees to forfeit all the hidden offshore assets, pay back taxes plus penalties totaling nearly $4 million, and cooperate with any further investigations. The sentencing hearing happens on a gray morning in March, 8 months after Emma's birth. Catherine doesn't attend, has no desire to watch Thomas's final public humiliation, but Margaret goes and reports back afterward. Thomas read a statement apologizing for his crimes, claiming he'd gotten caught up in trying to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford, accepting responsibility for his choices. He asked for leniency, talked about wanting to be in his daughter's life, about being a changed man who'd learned from his mistakes. The judge wasn't sympathetic and sentenced him to the full 8 years with credit for time served, meaning Thomas would be in federal prison until Emma is nearly 9 years old. Margaret relays all of this to Catherine over coffee, while Emma plays with toys on a blanket. Catherine feels a complex mix of emotions hearing about Thomas's sentencing. Not quite satisfaction, not quite sadness. Something more like resigned acceptance that this is how it had to be. He did this to himself, she says finally. Every choice that led him here was his own. I didn't make him hide money or evade taxes or commit fraud. I just made sure the truth came out. The divorce is finalized 3 months later, with Thomas signing papers from prison that give Catherine full custody and require him to pay child support from any future earnings. Though given his criminal record and imprisonment, it's unclear what those earnings might be. Catherine is awarded the majority of the marital assets, Thomas's remaining wealth divided in a way that leaves her with approximately $3 million beyond her inheritance. Money she immediately puts into a trust for Emma. The prenuptial agreement Thomas thought would protect him is ruled invalid due to the circumstances under which the divorce papers were obtained. And his financial crimes mean the court has little sympathy for his claims to keep hidden assets. Catherine changes Emma's last name legally to Wells, her own maiden name, wanting her daughter to have a fresh start without the weight of the Hartwell name and its now tainted reputation. She buys a house in a quiet neighborhood in Charleston, 3 bedrooms with a yard, nothing ostentatious despite her means. She wants Emma to grow up grounded, to understand that wealth is a tool, not an identity, to value character over money. She restarts her design business, working from home while caring for Emma, taking on select clients and projects that interest her. The work is fulfilling in a way it wasn't before, because now it's entirely her choice, not tied to proving anything or escaping anything, just genuine interest in creating beautiful things. Jessica becomes Emma's godmother officially, a small ceremony in Catherine's new house with close friends and family. Catherine's parents, who stood by her throughout everything, are regular visitors, helping with childcare and reveling in their granddaughter. Catherine builds a community of support, other single mothers, friends who proved their loyalty during her hardest times, family who showed up when it mattered. Her life looks nothing like what she imagined when she married Thomas, but it's honest and stable and hers. Emma grows up knowing a simplified version of her father's story, age-appropriate details that Catherine provides with help from a child psychologist. Your father made some bad choices, and he's in a place where people go when they break important rules. He loves you, but he can't be with you right now. It's not your fault, and you didn't do anything wrong. Adults sometimes make mistakes that have big consequences. As Emma gets older, the questions become more complex, and Catherine answers them honestly but gently, never bad-mouthing Thomas, but never sugarcoating the truth either. Thomas writes letters from prison occasionally. He sends birthday cards, maintains minimal contact that Catherine allows because therapists say it's important for Emma to know her father exists and thinks of her, even if he can't be present. Emma seems mostly indifferent to these letters, more interested in her school and friends and the life she's building with her mother and extended family. When Emma is 5 years old, Thomas is released on parole after serving 5 years of his sentence. He moves to another state, gets a job in sales, tries to rebuild his life far from Charleston and the wreckage of his past. He requests visitation with Emma through proper legal channels, and Catherine, after consultation with Emma's therapist and with significant court oversight, agrees to supervised video calls monthly. Emma participates in these calls dutifully, but without much enthusiasm, answering Thomas's questions about school and activities, but not volunteering much. Thomas to her is more concept than person, someone connected to her by biology, but not by any real relationship. Catherine sometimes watches these calls from off-camera, observes Thomas trying to connect with a daughter who doesn't really know him, and feels something almost like pity. He lost so much because he couldn't value what he had, because he thought control and money mattered more than integrity and love. Now he's a middle-aged man starting over with nothing, trying to build a connection with a child he abandoned in the worst possible way, reaping exactly what he sowed. Years pass, and Emma thrives. She's bright and creative, showing an early talent for art that Catherine nurtures. Enrolls her in classes and takes her to museums and encourages her to explore her interests. Emma knows she's loved fiercely, knows her mother fought for her, knows she comes from strength, even if she doesn't yet understand all the details. Catherine dates occasionally over the years, but nothing serious, focused primarily on being Emma's mother and building a life she's proud of. She's wary of trusting men again, carries scars from Thomas's betrayal that don't heal quickly or easily, but she's also open to the possibility that not everyone is like him, that real love might exist somewhere beyond the manipulation she experienced. When Emma is 7, Catherine meets David Chen at one of Emma's art shows, a widower with 2 teenage daughters, kind and genuine in a way that feels different from anything Catherine experienced before. And they become friends first, then slowly something more, moving carefully because both of them carry wounds from their pasts, and both of them have children to consider. David never tries to replace Emma's father, never oversteps, just becomes a steady presence in both their lives. Someone safe and supportive. 2 years later, Catherine and David marry in a small ceremony with their combined children as witnesses, building a blended family that works because everyone involved prioritizes honesty and respect. Emma gains 2 older stepsisters who dote on her, a stepfather who treats her mother with the gentleness she deserves, and a model of what healthy relationships actually look like. Thomas is informed of the marriage through legal channels since he still technically has parental rights, even if he rarely exercises them. He sends a short email through his lawyer saying he hopes Catherine is happy, that he wishes things had been different, that he regrets the pain he caused. Catherine doesn't respond, has long since moved past needing his acknowledgement or apology, but she saves the email in case Emma ever wants to see it. Evidence that her father at least eventually developed some minimal self-awareness. The story of what happened in that delivery room becomes somewhat legendary in certain circles, whispered among women as a cautionary tale about prenuptial agreements and financial vulnerability, shared as an example of how to fight back when someone tries to destroy you. Catherine is occasionally approached by women in similar situations, asking for advice or just wanting to tell her their own stories of betrayal and survival. She listens with compassion, shares the lessons she learned, connects them with resources when she can. She starts making anonymous donations to organizations that help women escape abusive relationships and gain financial independence, using her grandmother's money to help others avoid the trap she nearly fell into. 10 years after that September night when everything changed, Catherine sits in her garden watching Emma play with her stepsisters, now a confident 12-year-old with her mother's determination and her own unique brightness. Jessica is there too, her best friend who stood by her through everything, along with Catherine's parents and David, and a group of friends who've become chosen family. They're celebrating Emma's birthday, 12 years since the day she was born, and Catherine's old life ended, and her real life began. And someone asks Catherine if she ever thinks about Thomas, if she wonders how things might have been different, if she regrets the path her life took. Catherine looks at Emma, at the family she's built, at the life she's created from the ashes of betrayal. And her answer comes easily, not for a second. What Thomas did was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and the best thing that ever happened to me. It destroyed who I was, but it showed me who I could become. It took away the illusion of a perfect life, but it gave me a real one. Would I choose to go through it again? No. But would I trade what came after? Never. Emma is happy and loved and safe. I'm stronger than I ever imagined I could be. The people in my life are here because they choose to be, not because they're trapped or obligated. So that's worth more than any fairy tale that was built on lies. Later that evening, after everyone has gone home and Emma is asleep in her room, Catherine sits on her porch with David and reflects on the journey that brought her here. The delivery room is a memory now, still painful, but no longer consuming, just one chapter in a much larger story. Thomas is a footnote in her life, relevant only because he's Emma's father, but no longer someone with power over her emotions or her future. The revenge she took wasn't loud or dramatic, wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was simply about refusing to be destroyed, about fighting back with truth when someone tried to bury her with lies, about protecting her daughter and herself with every resource she had. The real revenge, Catherine has come to understand, I wasn't Thomas going to prison or losing his money or having his reputation shattered. The real revenge was Catherine building a life so full and rich and genuine that his absence from it meant nothing. The real revenge was Emma growing up healthy and happy, never knowing her father's toxicity as anything but a story about someone else. The real revenge was Catherine discovering her own strength, learning she didn't need someone else's validation or protection, finding out she was enough all by herself. Thomas tried to take everything from Catherine in that delivery room. Instead, he gave her the motivation to become everything she was meant to be. He handed her divorce papers expecting submission, and got into a war. He assumed poverty and powerlessness, and discovered wealth and weapons he never knew existed. He planned to leave her with nothing and ended up with nothing himself while she built everything. That's what happens when you underestimate someone. That's what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. That's what happens when you try to destroy a woman who's just discovered she has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Thomas learned that lesson 8 years too late, sitting in a federal prison watching his life crumble while Catherine's flourished. By the time he understood what he'd done, who he'd underestimated, how catastrophically he'd miscalculated, the game was already over. Catherine had won before Thomas even realized they were playing. And her victory wasn't measured in his defeat, but in her triumph, not in what he lost, but in what she built. It's not in revenge, but in justice, and in a life she created for herself and her daughter that was better than anything Thomas could have given them, even if he'd tried. That's the story of how Catherine Wells turned her darkest moment into her greatest strength, how she took abandonment and transformed it into liberation, how she let a man who tried to destroy her become the catalyst for her becoming indestructible. And every time she looks at Emma, healthy and happy and loved, she knows it was all worth it. Every tear, every battle, every moment of pain and fear and uncertainty, all of it worth it for this, for them, for a life built on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of subjection, on choice instead of control. Thomas tried to write an ending where Catherine disappears broken and forgotten. Instead, Catherine wrote her own story, and in it, she's not the victim. She's the warrior, the survivor, the woman who looked at impossible odds and said, "Watch me anyway." And when people ask how she did it, how she survived and thrived after such betrayal, Catherine's answer is always the same. I did it for Emma. I did it because someone needed to show her that you don't accept cruelty. You fight it. That you don't let people rewrite your worth. You prove it yourself. That being knocked down isn't the same as being defeated unless you choose to stay down. I got up. I fought back. And I won. Not because I destroyed him, but because I built something he could never take away. That's the revenge that matters. That's the victory that lasts.